Hey, it's Jessica DeMassa with WTF Health, and joining me right now I have Brent Stackhouse. He is the Managing Director for Mount Sinai Ventures. Brent, it's so good to have you with us.
It's exciting to be in Berlin and at Frontiers.
Yes, so before we go any further, I want to talk a little bit about what kind of investor you are, because I feel like I don't get to talk to strategic investors from hospital systems very often. So can you talk a little bit about what you do at Mount Sinai and how this all works? Because I understand you don't even have a fund. You're investing directly off the balance sheet. How is that different? Give us a little bit of an insight.
That is correct. There aren't many of us who are in the hospital corporate venture market. They come in different flavors. Some folks have accelerators or incubators where they're exchanging a little bit of money for equity or providing sweat equity. Some hospitals have a whole sweat equity program where if you work with them, they help to develop your product or validate your product. They're getting equity in exchange. Some funds are like mine, where we're making investments off of our balance sheet, but we don't have a standalone fund. Other hospitals have set up independent funds where they're the sole limited partner, but they have that set allocation of funds. So there's a little bit more of a motivation about getting money out the door. And then others still, like Ascension and Providence, are acting as general partners where they're managing money on behalf of other hospitals, which are limited partners. So that's sort of the spectrum. Okay. We sort of sit in the middle of it. What's interesting about that is we are constantly in conflict with the mission of the hospital because it's a very risk-adverse institution, which we would hope it would be, since their core business is taking care of people and trying to make them healthier, and venture is very risky. And so we are very cautiously trying to thread that needle between making good investments that are strategically relevant for the health system, maybe not necessarily big financial investments, with trying to manage risk and make sure that everyone within the institution is comfortable with what we're doing. Oftentimes, we have to say no to investment because there could be perceived conflicts of interest, or because it seems a little too risky for our patient population, and we're just not ready yet for whatever that clinical therapeutic might be, whatever that consumer thing might be, where an institutional investor would be glad to make this sort of investment. So we're very cautious.
Okay, let's unpack this level of caution. And so kind of give me, I guess, more specifics about like what is on the table and what is not. So are you looking at things like digital therapeutics to bring in? Are you looking at things like that are more like administrative system related, like things that help, the efficiency of a department run? I mean, what kinds of investments are you looking at?
So we have made investments in clinical solutions as well as in consumer solutions. It's very tricky, however. There's a lot of sensitivity around it. So I find that the likelihood of getting it approved by my board, which is the C-suite of the hospital system, is low. Because of all of that risk. There are a lot more questions are asked, I believe, at my institution about what does it mean for Mount Sinai to invest in something that our physicians are recommending to their patients, or that we're telling patients that they should use and sort of self-prescribe, so to speak, when our name is associated with it. And so as a result, I do find that we're making more investments on operational efficiency, tools that are focused on procurement, supply chain, clinical trials management is a recent investment we made in a company called Hawthorne Effect. And although we do have some solutions that are geared towards patients, it was a very lengthy process. And frankly, it's difficult for us to be able to move as quickly as these entrepreneurs are hoping their investment will raise funds for. So as a result, it's difficult sometimes for us to hit that timing.
And it doesn't necessarily mean, though, that the hospital won't use some of these clinical new digital therapeutics or like some of the clinical digital apps or things like that. It just means that Mount Sinai is not comfortable putting their name behind the investment for it.
Exactly. In fact, all of the investments I look at are being used or are about to be used by the health system. We have a robust scientific community within the Mount Sinai School of Medicine and the Mount Sinai Health System. And as a result, they are piloting, testing, validating, and writing papers and research on all sorts of really amazing innovations. But whether or not we decide to put additional equity investments into those companies is a very different conversation.
So what does a startup need to do to get in front of you? So those that are watching that might be one of those more administrative, revenue cycle management, efficiency kind of startups, how do they get to you?
So it happens in three ways. The best way is for somebody within the health system to find me and recommend the product. That happened just yesterday. I got a phone call from one of our clinical trials managers who has a solution that's focused on managing all the regulatory risk of clinical trials. It's more of like a document processing system and she reached out to me and said, Brent, I've been using this. I think it's really exciting. Can I introduce you to these people? I know this is how you find investments. That's ideal. Separately, when other investors come to me and say, hey, Mount Sinai is piloting this product that we're investors in, or have signed a contract with this company that's in our portfolio, then I can usually find the people within the health system to be the advocate for that potential investment from me. And then the last way is when entrepreneurs themselves come to me and say, I'm working with someone. Oftentimes, the people they're working with don't necessarily have the right amount of political capital for the investment to be successful going through my committee, or worse, the person who's using the product doesn't even know that they're using the product. And that has happened to me more than once when someone says, this guy at Mount Sinai loves my company, and I go to that guy and they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay, friendly tip to startups, make sure that you know that the guy who you're going to recommend or that you're going to name drop knows that you're using their product.
I'm going to make that phone call next.
Oh my God, that's great. Can we listen in on that? That'd be fantastic.
My favorite's when I'm at conferences like this and I see the Mount Sinai logo on the board and I start texting everyone within the institution. They're like, we've never heard of this company.
That's awesome. Love that. All right, so beyond some advice for startups, what I do want to pick your brain about, I guess, a little bit from your vantage point, you're in a unique spot in the investor ecosystem. So tell us what you're seeing more broadly. I mean, you go around the world, you're here in Berlin, you're based in New York, you keep your eye on what's going on investment trend-wise in healthcare, not just with strategics, but venture, angels, the whole gamut. So what are you seeing? Is there any big trends that you can kind of clue us in on that you've noticed as you've been looking at the market?
I see so much money in healthcare. It is amazing. I think everyone's opening a fund. It feels like we are surrounded by entrepreneurs, though statistically, I was just reading that there were actually more startup companies 10 years ago started than there were started this year. And I read recently, I think it was CB Insights put out a statistic that the size of the investment, the initial investment is getting larger, the number of initial investments are getting smaller, and as a result, the number of new entrants in the market are getting smaller. I believe their data, but empirically, man, does it feel like everyone's got a new innovation. And one of the things that I find really challenging and exciting in the same way is when I'm going around to these different conferences around the world is how many solutions I come across that are duplicating efforts of other solutions in other parts of the world.
It drives me nuts.
It does. There's such good money being thrown into the wind and scattered about. It would be so much nicer if we could sort of consolidate those efforts. I don't think that's the thought of a capitalist, however, so I need to work on that.
No, I don't know. I mean, but I do think that we're starting to see some market consolidation, and I do think also this year there have been some clear market leaders emerging in certain spaces. So, I mean, we're kind of starting to see the roles being cast and the couple of companies that are leading the way. Chronic condition management, right off the top of my head, just kind of comes to mind, and I think it's some other spots as well.
Absolutely. One of the things I came across here is speaking to a company that said, well, we were built to be bought. Like the build.
Nobody wants to hear that.
No, I mean, sure, as an investor, okay, great. I know where your exit strategy is. That's really exciting to me. I'm not looking for a big return. The faster, the better. But wow, that's sort of disheartening if you're really trying to make an impact on our health and wellness as a community. Something else has been really interesting.
Are they also mission driven? That's usually my favorite. We're a mission driven organization, but man, we are built to be bought.
So that means they have no profit, and also they're trying to get sold. Love it. What's a multiple on zero again? Terrific. So one of the things that's been really interesting being in Europe, I think specifically this week with the 30-year anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall and all of the activities around the Syrian refugee community here in Berlin, has been sort of greater awareness for me in the opportunity for global public health and a lot of the innovations that we're seeing. You have issues around access to healthcare in a lot of these displaced populations. You certainly have challenges around behavioral mental health and access to solutions to meet their needs remotely. And I see this wonderful opportunity for some of the solutions that we're getting inundated with in New York City that actually might be more suitable for a conflict area. The question is how do you find a buyer? And is that an NGO or some other non-governmental agency? But I would love to be able to see where in this conference I'm able to meet people who can maybe make that connection in a way that certainly I'm not smart enough or sophisticated enough to.
You are smart and sophisticated aplenty, and it is always a pleasure to talk to you. Brent, thank you so much for stopping by. Always a pleasure. I'm Jessica DeMassa with WTF Health. Thanks for joining us.